We are here with John DeJoia and Dev from Strathmore, and I am super excited because this is one of my favorite uranium plays. It has many things going for it, but we have fresh news to talk about today. And so I would like to go straight into it. News came out today. And before we actually start talking about the little details, and I know that geos like to get really geeky on the details and what it means. John, I'd like to welcome you to the show for the first time. Dev's been here a few times before, but John and Dev, welcome. John, tell me a little bit about your background, please, and how you ended up being a uranium specialized geologist, as I understand it.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I greatly appreciate the chance to talk about uranium. It's been my life for 50 years and probably 20 years before that, I guess. But anyway, I first got into uranium in 1971. I got a call from a former classmate of mine who got a job at the Utah International Shirley Basin mine and said, John, we're looking for more geologists. And I said, wonderful. And I talked to the personnel director and he hired me over the phone. So right away, I should have known this might be a long ways from anywhere, but hired me over the phone. I wasn't able to show up for work until March of 1972. Anyway, I got there the very first night that I was in the mine. I was on night shift. It was dark. It's still pretty dark when night shift started. They gave me a Mack truck, which is an ore hauling truck, and a Geiger counter, and said, your job is to walk around with a Geiger counter, and when you see the needle moves to a certain point, you put a flag in the ground. Well, okay, that's a pretty good instructions. I can watch a needle. Well, I jumped out in the midst of a whole fleet of scrapers, excavators, and a whole bunch of people that didn't know what they were doing. Froze my parts off that night. It was colder. It was about 20 below zero that night. By morning, I had put out some red flags and they came down and said, well, good job. Looks like you're doing well. And he says, how was it? And I said, it was cold. He says, why didn't you get in the truck? What? I didn't know I was allowed to. So anyway, that was my starting jack. That was the start of my career in uranium mining. From that point, I mined through about 20 million pounds in Shirley Basin and another couple of million pounds in another couple of basins in the state of Wyoming. I went from Utah International to become chief geologist and director of technical services at Federal American Partners in the Gas Hills of Wyoming. After that, I did, the uranium market started a real plunge to the bottom at that point. I had done the uranium mill tailings reclamation project study and design in Riverton, went on to that project, worked it, went into nuclear remediation for a few years. I was responsible for the decontamination and decommissioning of the Omega West reactor at Los Alamos National Lab and the rest of their environmental nuclear program. Anyway, about then, it was in the mid 2000s, Dev came into the picture. And I hired on with Strathmore Resources at that time. Dev was our CEO. And I got to know Dev a little bit then, and more and more over the years. Dev spun out with Fission. I kept going, and then finally, about 8 years ago, I retired. I did a little consulting, but I basically retired at that point in time. And about a year ago, Dev called me up and said, John, what are you doing? And I said, well, not much of anything. Enjoying myself. I play a little golf, fish, hunt. But anyway, Dev said, well, you're too young to do that. Come on with us. And he talked me into it about a year and a half ago. And I said, I'm really happy to be with Dev again. He's an outstanding developer. And you can see that from his record.
When you're small, you don't have the capital to compete with a chemical to buy something. So you have two choices. If you got to beat somebody, you beat them with a mine. And to me, whether it was hiring Ross and Ray or working here with Ross and John, it's the same thing. You look at John and look at Ross and these guys, right? They're all technically strong, right? and they're ethically strong, and they can work with others. There are two ways to go in the U.S. You buy a huge asset, way out of the money, and say you're playing the option, the price on it. So you can buy assets, and what I said before, I said take pigs, put lipstick on them, and hope they fly. I've seen a lot of that in the U.S. Or I wanted to take more of an approach of, okay, let's outsmart people. And I knew John had forgotten more about the industry than most people knew. You have to think about the 70s were the heyday for the US, where, they used to produce, remember, 40 million pounds and needed 4. And then now they need 50 and they produce nothing. Kazakhstan and Canada sort of dominated it primarily because of economics. But I knew John in his mind had some ideas. And then we needed someone to obviously be the hands and feet. And that's where Terrence comes in. But you have to strategy-wise decide if you're going to outsmart somebody or outspend somebody. Well, that wasn't an option for us. So we decided to outsmart. And so John had different ideas in his head. We started with Beaver Rim because that's where we drilled in Strathmore before. The previous company called Strathmore Minerals. This one's called Strathmore Plus. We had drilled there. So we grabbed that land. And then finally, last year or the spring when John came to see me in Scottsdale, he says he thought he might remember a former producer. I was like, what? So when we went out there, we were shocked. The land was available. So, John, so that's where we got into Night Owl. It's just strictly from John's mind. I know a lot of geologists who have never found anything, but John, on the other hand, has not only found stuff, okay, he's gone the next step. He's actually put things in production, whether it's a leach or it's a, ISL, he knows every step it will take. So when we look at a project, even like Night Owl, we're not just looking at it from the perspective geologically. John will know what the next steps will be. So, I'm just fortunate to work with good guys like Ross and John, who, and they're great to work with. Jamie, one of the guys will tell you. So John, you remember, because the heyday was the 70s, we're talking 50 years ago. So not to sound morbid, who the hell's alive, right? First of all.
Good question.
First of all, that's a very small pocket. Who's still got a sharp mind, all right? And John has all that. I mean, John just drove 8 hours last week to come see me, and so it's about trying to build a team, but you got to have somebody with the leadership of the brain. So each of our assets are reflecting the fact that John has found it and put it in production. So I'm quite confident that if we get the right project and access to capital, we can put these things in actual production, not talk about it, because that's the thing that investors should look at. Okay, which teams out there have actually put things in production themselves, right? John's done that. So I think that's one of the differences, I think, in our company over others, that we have people who actually produce, 22 million pounds. So I'm very confident because of that, that we can grow this.
That's beautiful. And listen, having mined over 20 million pounds of uranium in Wyoming historically is no small feat. There are not many people that can claim that about any mineral around the world, right? That is really meaningful. So that's awesome. We're definitely taking note of that. John, what do we know, or what did people know geologically and production-wise about Night Owl way back in the 70s? Because I hear, that uranium was so close to the surface that they were able to mine it without actually doing much of what we would consider, modern geological work.
Well, excuse me. In order to answer that question, I have to give you a little bit more background on Night Owl.
Please do.
I was sitting in my office one day at Shirley Basin, my mine office. The superintendent came in and said, "John, there's a gentleman outside who doesn't know how to get his rig to his property." And I said, "Okay, I can sure help him." So anyway, it was the gentleman that owned Night Owl originally, and he had a drill rig with him, and he said, "I don't know how to get the rig up there." I said, "I'll take you up." So I led him up to his property with his drill rig, and he thanked me for it. And I forget how much longer it was. A few weeks later, he came down and said, "Would you like to come up for dinner around the campfire?" This was in the early mid 70s. So I went up, had dinner with him, found out they were having some trouble with the rig, just various things. He didn't tell me anything about the deposit. And I thought, boy, this is pretty rough country for a roll front. I said, just doesn't look right. But I filed it in my mind. I went back one more time, I think it was that summer, visited with him, and said hello. And he said, well, we've only gotten a few holes. And I said, what'd you find? He says, oh, he says, you know how it is. Well, he couldn't tell me, that was part of the game. I had to look at cuttings and stuff if I wanted to learn anything. However, that sat in my mind until, I guess 20 years ago, and I brought it up. Nobody had any interest, so I thought, well, okay. And when Dev put me on, I said, there's a property. And anyway, we looked into it. We found some old records. They had mined a small amount of ore back in I think it was the early 60s. We got very little data on it. It averaged about 0.24% U3O8. Well, that's a little bit higher than the average grade in Shirley Basin. So I thought, that's definitely worth looking into. Well, as we delve into it, I said, Terrence, we need to go out and stake this. He went out, staked the property, and did a walkover with a Sinaloa. Now, these folks back in the 50s found it from an airplane, probably a Piper Cub, a small one passenger airplane, basically. And they probably hung a Geiger counter underneath the plane. That was how basic things were then. Well, they got a reading on the Geiger counter, obviously staked the area, and really never knew much about it. We went out this summer after staking it, investigating it, and Terrence had done a scintillometer survey, found good grades, pegged the scintillometer on the surface. But we took samples and we looked around, and the area where they had mined, of course, keep in mind, they did not know the geology of the area. They mined basically the place where we found the samples and under the mineralization. They were underneath it. They didn't, if they'd have gone up 5 or 6 feet higher, they might still be operating. They had basically no instrumentation. It was a one-man operation and a backhoe and a dump truck. They did not have the benefit of modern exploration tools. They didn't have the benefit of a budget. This was an older man and his wife that owned this property. This was kind of a hobby. Anyway, we were fortunate enough to pick it up. After our visit to the site this summer, all of us, we stood there and said, what can we do here? How do we explore this? And we all came to the conclusion that, at this point in time, we need to use some advanced exploration methods. And that's what we did. We employed a firm from Reno. They came in, did a flyover with a drone. Well, the drone is a really important part of this, and it's only been recently that we've started using these things. You couldn't fly this very low with a Piper Cub, you'd wreck. There's hills around it. So with a drone, they're able to get down close and use this instrumentation. After the first couple of days, we looked at the maps and said, my gosh, the trend follows the outcrop. It also goes down dip along the slope of the outcrop and goes to the edges of the property. Well, I got pretty excited at this point in time. This has the potential. This is not a roll front deposit. This is in older sediments from 350 million years ago that have been buried by the newer sediments that make up the basin.
So basically with the naked eye, you could go out there and see that this looks like the structure of something that holds uranium in this region.
If you didn't know there was uranium there, you probably would not look at it.
Gotcha.
However, we have now, I think it was 8 samples that we took. It got as high as 36 hundredths. I think it was 0.368. That's nearly 7 pounds per ton. That's pretty good deposit in the United States.
For sure.
Anyway, we looked around. First thing we did was say, we got to get some more land. And recently we put out, or I guess this morning, actually, the press release came out that we've increased our land holding there about 300%. We were able to use these new techniques to identify surface mineralization. We were able to use geology to identify additional. In fact, one night Dev says, you know, we have a model up in Canada. And I said, well, we do too, but it's in my mind. So if you look in the press release, you'll be able to see our new model. And we have identified other areas that have potential. I'm really excited about this. I don't mean to get too excited, but this is new. It's an old deposit, but it's new.
I am just as excited,
Lots
John.
of,
And we're
interest.
going to get into the map and what that looked like and what that looks like now with Strathmore just being able to
Great.
actually get some more licenses. But I wanted to ask Dev a spicy question here because Dev is involved with drilling the Athabasca Basin, right? And you're also going to be drilling in Wyoming, which is a completely different jurisdiction. Dev, can you tell us a little bit more about, you know, for people who are just hearing about Strathmore for the first time, how does this differ? What are, and also what are the expectations? Because when we look at something that's being currently mined in Wyoming, we're talking, you know, a much lower grade. And yet when we talk about the Athabasca Basin, we're talking about much higher grade. Sometimes a lot deeper and harder to get to. Can you just make a quick comparison of the two, please, so that we understand that lower grade does not necessarily mean non-economic?
Well, because it's, well, first of all, on the Agat and Beaver Rim, it doesn't matter because grade has very little to do with it. They're more like a water, remember, you're under the water table. So ISR mining is very different. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, mining is more expensive in the US. I've always said cash costs in Kazakhstan are about 20 if you include everything in them. Okay, I still believe cash costs and getting your money back is about 40 in the basin. I think it's closer to 60 here in the US. It is more expensive, but what makes the advantage of being in the US, especially Wyoming. Wyoming's had almost 80% of all uranium ever mined in the States. As we're in the right place, but drilling's a lot cheaper. For example, you know, it's up, you know, a drill hole can cost you 10 grand, 15, whereas, you know, Canada can cost 200, 300,000. So the three projects we've got are two are ISR, situ recovery, whereas Night Owl would be a leaching. We've been able to identify a group that might be able to move us along that production chain quicker. But at the end of the day, you know, absolutely, you know, we need probably, you know, we need $60 in my view to kind of break even. And more. I think even Amir and UEC has said we need more. Inflation costs have driven things up. But one thing I've learned through being in the Athabasca Basin is you can waste a lot of money drilling because everybody wants you to drill. All investors love it. But the problem is the average guy doesn't realize that if you drill something and miss it, people will dismiss the property. Well, some of the world's best deposits ever were picked up after someone drilled it for the wrong geological model. Well, I know that we don't make those mistakes. We make sure that we have our ideas, you know, the science ideas we've got, theories about it, the structure, where is it coming from, where are the fluids, and once you identify all those, like we tick certain boxes, right? Then you drill, and so our project here is that we're actually gonna get some help from some people who consult to Fission 3.3 and some geophysicists to interpret some of the thing. You know, it's funny in oil, the U.S. has always done three-dimensional. Canada, we don't. Here in uranium, people don't use a lot of geophysics, but we are going to need it. So we're thankful to have that. So you properly want to look at your property. May not excite the market, but it's the right prudent thing to do is to understand it. I mean, these two maps, if you look at it, you know, what did we announce today? We found something almost 10 kilometers, 6 miles away, another area that has geological signature where we are. And if you look at the map we have, when we flew it with the drones, we found that Night Owl is just one tiny piece. It's massive. You can stand on this property. You don't have to be a geologist. You can look all, because they're all valleys. You can look across and see rocks everywhere. And you go, okay, because you see you're standing on a white rock and you see the white rocks over there. So we knew visually there's more opportunity than just this area. Because that was my concern, obviously, with Night Owl is, great, we got a little mine, but how big is it? You know, investors want to see size. So now having flown it and we identified several more targets, as you can see, if you haven't got that map up, you can see that the orange is high grade, but also in the middle, there's these blue areas that we believe uranium underneath. It might be a foot, it might be more, but we know there's uranium there. So we're going to get some geophysical help there. So what we've learned, today's announcement tells us there might be more of these models. Again, it's about thinking differently. David's don't beat Goliath through strength. We use brains and ideas that work. So we've learned that night owl is great, but it's part of a bigger system right where we are. And we've also learned, hold on, even might be another structure like this out there. So our job we to do the vectoring in, and once we do, John, let's say we find 1 million or a few million pounds there. You've gone through this before. What are the steps that a company has to take it to production?
Well, the first thing that we have to do, obviously, is generate a resource that we feel is an economic target. The second thing we have to do is gather all the background data for a permit. And, we're going to be in the process of doing that. We're going to do an exploration to give us a better idea of our resource. We will start doing the flora, fauna, cultural resources, air, water, you name it. We've got to get the background information for the site. That's the next step. Then obviously, once we have all the background, we apply and try to get our permit for the mining of this property. We also need to do a feasibility study. What might work for technology? And I think we've beat it around a little bit, and we're pretty much in agreement on a tentative method of extraction and processing. And we have talked to companies in the area. There is one company that has an NRC license that I believe will take any waste rock from the process that we have as a nuclear material. So we don't think we're looking at a tailings type operation. It will be open pit type, but it's very, very shallow. It's surface to a few feet. The maximum depth I'm expecting is like 80, 85 feet for what we're looking at in this area. So with that in mind, we also have companies with ISR permits in Shirley Basin that I believe are going to be receptive to taking our loaded resins. So we feel really good about this project. It has the potential to really develop.
This is interesting. I'm looking at the map that Dev mentioned here, and I see Night Owl. And it looks now like such a tiny speck compared to the larger area, which is labeled 2023 exploration target. And, they're about 10 kilometers or so from each other. And I see that, the Night Owl mine site has, concentric circles going from green to red. And so does the exploration target. How true and how close is the correlation of these sort of studies versus what's actually in the ground? Is this like a home run when you find this sort of reading in this particular area, or does that just give you more clues into the possibility of finding uranium at a certain grade?
Obviously, it gives you more clues to finding it. However, it does fit our model. And when I apply what we've learned here, of course, nobody knew anything about this till just the last few months. When I apply our model to this, the Shirley Basin is approximately 20 miles long, and the formation that we're in goes completely under Shirley Basin. Now, I don't expect the mineralization to go to the middle of the basin because it was moved in by groundwater over time. That's the way it was deposited. However, any place we find source rocks, like I'll explain to you in a little bit here, that close to the limestone, I think we have the potential for mineralization.
We're looking forward to flying the new property and looking for targets. That's the whole idea. Look for, find targets, interpret the geoscience, then you put the drill holes in, which is good because there's a lot of land here, and we really can't drill till spring. So this is a good time for us to understand geologically and try to do as much more. So John, what do you think? What kind of steps can we take before we start to drill on Night Owl, you feel?
The steps before we start to drill on Night Owl?
Yeah.
I would like to do a little bit more surface radiometric geophysical survey. I'd like to do some more surface sampling, and I'd like to acquire about 100,000 more acres. However, I have to be reasonable about that. We have lots of targets identified per our model. we've got a lot of work to do on that, but I'd like to do surface work, and I'd like to do airborne radiometrics, which we plan on finishing in this when the weather breaks.
So what can shareholders expect in the next, say, 3 to 6 months with Night Owl and the company?
Well, I think, the other two we can discuss another time. But here for us, it's gathering information much as we can and get on the ground when we can. There's a lot of land. I think certainly hiring some geoscientists who interpret the data we've got and fund enough to drill. But just knowing that you've got this many targets, it's a great comfort. Like I think I said to you maybe once before, maybe on this one, my concern was a very small piece of land and how big can it grow? But knowing now that we got a much larger piece and somebody locally has a license to contain the waste, can take the 7-year, and shrink it. Because all you need a license to mine then. You don't need one to get rid of the waste. And no one's using that one. So, I think we're very positive about moving it up, because that's the key, is to have size, grade, and have a path to production. That's the key in my view. You do that, that's what gets investors excited. Or are you just going to buy, crappy properties with some pounds on them that's super low grade, way down, and put lipstick on it and wait for uranium prices to rise? That's not our goal.
Mhm.
Our goal is to build a mine, and we think at least we got people who've done it. And it's a question of time. We do need higher uranium prices. I think that's the same thing Amir would tell you, or Bill Sheriff and Paul would tell you at Encore. We all need higher prices. That's one of the reasons of being in the States. But I hope that they do less talking and more action by the Biden administration. That there are so many tax-driven ways to do exploration in Canada. The U.S. has none. And at least in Wyoming, we don't have the red tape. So there's just things we got to get done. But it's good. I think you're on your way. I think the U.S. needs to be independent. The average American, even my friends who I consider to be smart, have no idea. Every fifth light bulb in this country is powered by nuclear. They have no idea. They think it's wind and power. Wind and solar. It's not. Nuclear power is a huge role in the country. And I'm glad for the first time we've talked before, it's the first Democrat administration that believes in nuclear, and they've helped do their best they can. Say Energy Secretary and others said, hey, we're not going to get there in the way we're going. And so, like I said, even the Germany of the United States, California recognized it.
Mhm.
They need nuclear power. They're going to leave on the reactor Diablo Canyon longer. So I think the world is turning around. I like to see a higher uranium price. And I think we would have had a higher uranium price if spot was trading at a premium, but it's not, because of overall markets concerned about inflation to whatever. So the U.S. I think is a good place to be, because this country is waking up to realizing you can't trust certain countries to, like, sadly, Germany, 50% of all their energy right now is coal, lignite. I mean, are you kidding me? All this yapping about how they're gonna, cut down on their, they're actually doubling and tripling it. There's more pollution than ever. Japan found that out. I think the gig is up. Politicians realize you can't keep lying to people and tell them that we can live with the unicorns are going to build all these solar plants. Unicorns are going to, it's going to be amazing, the turbines. No. If people are waking up, and they're going to have to take real actions like China has done and other countries who have seen this coming. So I think the U.S. is going to be a good place for the next while, because I think as the American public wakes up and realizes we need nuclear power. It's the only baseload power out there. Only one.
I agree. I fully agree. And that's why the US is so interesting to me right now, because I can see that shift happening, that cultural shift happening, of people almost waking up from, a very long slumber of, oh, okay, we actually need electricity, and we need it to be clean, and we need it to be nuclear. Who would have thought? Such a simple idea that we've been doing for so many decades, and now it's coming back into vogue finally. Just to wrap it up, thank you very much, gentlemen. Where can people find out more about Strathmore? I believe you have a website with all this information where people can actually go and check out the map that we're showing here, and also check out some of the news that you put up there as well.
Well, I think our website is the easiest. So Strathmore Plus, It's a pretty good website. Simple. You know, that's why I like your approach, Fabi, that, you know, what we say has to make sense to the average investor, not just the analyst, the 5 analysts in the world that need a complete breakdown, you know.
And that's not an
of the-
exaggeration, right? It's about 5.
I'm not sure there's even three straight up. But anyways, unfortunately, you know, it's like the 70s when uranium was hot. There was lots of people understand uranium, then it went dead in the States. And now it's resurging. The Renaissance, same thing when it comes to analysts. When bankers don't need them, you know, they switch out to do other things. So yeah, I mean, as you know, I love Dave Talbot. I think he's the best in the business right now. And he's written some nice, they're supporting us at Red Cloud. And, you know, David really does get it. David really gets what we're trying to do. And, you know, he said in a note to me that, you know, it's got potential to be a low cost, high grade producer. You know, they're talking about, they don't like me to talk about it, like a flat breccia pipe. And the highest grade deposits in the States are Arizona pipes, which are breccia. So he sees potential for that. That's great. I was concerned that we don't have enough land. So I think now that once we get to understand our area, we'll continue to get more land, because state leases are very cheap, $6 a claim. Obviously, it goes on private land, that's different. It's a different system, obviously, in the States, but thank goodness Terrence and John understand it. So yeah, no, we're excited. You know, we're a very super small market cap, and so we think that, you know, around 10 million US or less, you know, people can pick up a company with 3 assets, I think, in all of our production. And we've got 2 ISR and 1, you know, possible heap leach. So, and again, it's very lean. We run the company very lean. And that's the key to surviving bear markets, is stay lean and motivate people through equity. When you do that, the markets turn and you can be more aggressive. Well, that's exactly in Fission 3, right?
Yeah.
We went into a bear stage, we cut back expenses, now we're gearing back up. But, you know, and so that's what we've been doing. We're fortunate to have a low market cap. I think great projects, and more importantly, great people. I have repeated it 1 million times, I will again. Nothing's more important in a public company than the people. Have they built anything before? Have they found uranium? Have they put it in production? Have they built companies? And obviously, Ross and I are on our 3rd discovery up in Canada, and we're going to try to use some of that science to help John and Terrence develop. So it's just a great team with the lean budgets, salary-wise, because that's going to be the problem. If this, you know, malaise continues, who's going to survive without the cash?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thank you very much, both of you. I hear the words high grade, low cost in the US. I am happy. My smile can barely fit my face. Thank you, John, and thank you, Deb.
Well,
I hope
thank
to speak to you both very soon. All the best.
Thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.